Hey guys, welcome back to First and 10 over here on Clueless Gamers. I'm your host, Pete, joined in a second, as always, by my co host, Brian. Guys, welcome in. We're here to recap week 2 of the NFL season here in 2023, and we're doing our picks, of course, for week 3. We're already 2 weeks in, Bri. It's going. Uh, I would say unexpected to what we figured. I mean, there's always injuries in the NFL, but I feel like this season there has been more injuries to top players and key cogs to mainstream teams across the NFL than ever before, at least in recent memory that I can think of. And certainly I know fantasy teams are hurting out there because I know mine is hurting through 2 weeks. Guys, it's been greatly the support you gave, the likes last week, some comments. We greatly appreciate that. And we're excited to be getting back to doing this more regular here in our fourth First and 10 season. With all that being said, Bri, I welcome you in. A crazy week, as always. Week 2 had some great finishes, had some blowouts, has some teams already in serious trouble to start the 2023 season. We'll talk about all that, but first impressions, what'd you think watching last week?
Yeah, a lot of crazy finishes. I mean, the 1 o'clock window, a lot of great football. It's always great when you get into that witching hour, as it
I
becomes
know, I
known,
love that.
between 3 and 4 o'clock, and you had a couple of games go into overtime last week. One of them being the Lions and Seahawks. Seattle getting a rather surprising win. I think it's safe to say,
Mm,
pulling that one out in overtime in a high-scoring affair. There's a lot to get to. I know we kind of only focus on a couple of games each from the previous week. I mean, you could go to the Jets and their game. Look, there wasn't really a whole lot to say about their performance in
yeah.
Dallas. It was not very good from the quarterback. It wasn't very good from the defense. It was a very high quality opponent they were going up against. You would have liked to see a closer game, but you know what? It's one game. You have
Yeah.
to move forward, and they'll move forward and try to take down a team that they haven't beaten the last 14 times they played them. So
Yeah, we'll talk.
that's
We'll
going to
certainly
be a
talk
12.
about that in picks. Of course, I could talk about the Rams and them getting beaten for their ninth straight time in the regular season of the 49ers. It's a disturbing trend going on there as well. We could talk about a whole bunch of games that happened. A lot of exciting games. Kind of the Bills getting back to their footing, looking pretty good there in upstate New York. You have a whole situation going on with the Bengals and their game against the Ravens. I think there's a lot of interesting games, Bry. But since we usually just pick a handful because we can't spend 3 hours here on this podcast. Bright, we're gonna kick it off. We each picked, as you said, a couple games to start. And for me, I want to go to Chiefs Jags. Right, I want to go all the way down to Florida, the southeastern United States. I want to talk about this game because I felt like going into this game, you have the Chiefs. They open the season, they have the 1 point loss to the Lions. There's no Kelsey, there's no Chris Jones, all that stuff happens, right? Well, you get both of those guys back in this game. And the way the Jags looked, I'll be against the Colts in week 1, I was like, all right, here it is. Here's the high scoring affair. We're going to get like a 30-27 game. I think the Chiefs will still prevail, but this is going to be a really exciting one. Kind of shows like Trevor Lawrence is kind of up and coming, right? He's becoming one of the next great QBs. And instead, we got a little bit of a sloppy offensive game and a defensive game. 17-9 is the final score of this game where the Chiefs ultimately pull it out. And for the Jags to struggle the way they did, I think the multiple trips into the red zone, I believe it was something like 5, walk away with 3 field goals, not what I expected. And I'm left wondering, and I'm left wondering, asking myself this question, asking you this question. Is it bad Jags offensive play? Was it great? Like, is this Chiefs defense way better than we thought they would be? Or is it some combination of both? I mean, what do you kind of lean on that?
I think typically when you ask the question, is it bad one unit or good the other unit? I think typically the answer is it's a little bit of both. I don't feel like in most cases that's where it is, where it's not like only one side is responsible. So that's kind of how I see it there. But yeah, I mean, the Chiefs don't have many games where they only score 17 points, and you kind of think from a Jags perspective, they could hold Kansas City to that total,
They'd
that
be
they
in
have
good
enough
shape. Yeah.
firepower, right, that they'd be able to win. But you mentioned the struggles in the red zone, and, Calvin Ridley had a huge week 1, looked like he was kind of becoming the go to weapon for Lawrence didn't really work out in week 2. I mean, Christian Kirk kind of picked up the slack, had a big game. Evan Ingram has really kind of found a home there after a lot of
He
struggles with
really
the
has.
Giants.
Yeah.
He's become a reliable weapon at the tight end spot. But yeah, overall, just not enough from Jacksonville. Kind of a disappointing effort, albeit against a team that everyone believes is going to go very far this year.
I mean, I just want to read to you the possessions throughout the entire game of the Jacksonville Jaguars. First drive, punt, field goal, fumble, turnover on downs, field goal, punt, field goal, turnover on downs. I mean, that's bad. I mean, that's real bad. And you're talking about a game where the Chiefs also had a fumble. They also gave away an interception, right? Like, they did things too. They were not great. They were not sharp. They're still figuring out this receiving core. You know, you have Tony catching the ball this week, but fumbling the ball. You know, Watson is kind of struggling in what he's doing there. There's not a lot of guys. You know, Sky Moore doesn't look like he's ready to step up yet. Now, we're through 2 weeks, I understand, but you hold this team, as you mentioned, to 17 points. You're at home. You got to score more than 3 field goals. I mean, that's just not good enough. And yeah, Kirk kind of picked up the slack, but you got to give credit. Travarius Ward, he's on the other side there, primarily for most of the game that was covering Ridley. He kind of shut him down. I mean, and this Chiefs defense, you know, Chris Jones looked like he's been here the entire training camp, preseason, and week 1. I mean, he looked great. He gets a sack in this game. He's getting a ton of QB pressures. He looked absolutely fresh, fantastic. That D-line was ready to go. And I think this Chiefs defense is actually a lot better than we think they are. A lot better, certainly, than I thought that they would be. Because, you know, we think of the Mahomes era, even the Chiefs era dating back to Alex Smith. I don't think the first thing that we thought of was, man, that Chiefs defense, they some boys.
No.
Like, they amazing over there. No, not at all, right? It was always Andy Reid, offensive first-minded, and of course they still are. But Steve Spagnuolo's got these defensive guys going, man. I mean, these guys are flying around. They got a lot of top picks there. They've drafted deep in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th rounds. They've found some guys, and without, you know, they've let guys go, right? I mean, Clark's gone. All these main pass rushers that they've had over the years, and they're still doing things. You know, Tyrann Mathieu's not there anymore. None of these guys are here. And with Chris Jones and all these other guys, they found pieces. They found cogs. I really like watching them play for these first 2 weeks. Again, what we would think would be 2 pretty high-powered offenses in the Lions and the Jags, right? They got a lot of talent on these teams, 2 good or pretty decent, at least, quarterbacks. And the Chiefs have really contained them 14 points and 9 points, respectively, because, you know, they had the pick 6 that the Lions had in week 1. I think that's pretty impressive. I really do. And I just want to give them all the stuff, rightfully so, as always talked about Mahomes. I want to give them their props, too.
Yeah, and I think they need their defense to step up because I think their offense is in a little bit of a compromised state to start the season. Not quite the firepower that we expect. I mean, Kelsey clearly is still a little bit hobbled with that knee. He did score a touchdown, but by no means was this a big Kelsey game. I mean, he had 26 receiving yards.
He didn't look perfect, right? Like, I know he was dancing in the warm-ups, and, like, you know, he did the whole fake knee injury, and then, like, you know, he was playing for the cameras, but he just, to me, just to the eyeball, not being a football professional, like, he looked a little stiff, right? Like, he looked a little like he wasn't Kelsey yet. And that makes sense because you're coming off of that injury. You want to take it easy. He was still an impact on the game, even regardless.
Right. And you know, the fact is they don't have a go-to number 1 wide receiver. I mean, it kind of feels like it's going to be a situation where it's one guy one week and then another guy the next week. Valdez Scantling will have a good game here and there. Sky Moore, you know, Watson, but they don't have the go-to guy. We know Tony is clearly mistake-prone, so he's not a guy that you can count on reliably week in and week out. So I think the offense, as crazy as it may be to say, is a little bit of a work in progress for the Chiefs.
And I think it's completely okay to say that. And you know what? I'm not worried in the slightest. When you got Patrick Mahomes, when you have the best quarterback in football in the world right now, I'm really not worried about it. I mean, this is like... This reminds me of those prime Brady years where it's just like, this guy is so good. We put some even somewhat marginal, you know, kind of smart football players around him. He's going to elevate him. He's going to make him better. And so I'm not really worried in the slightest. And I really actually do like Sky Moore's talent. I do like Tony's talent. I believe if they could kind of come into their own, cut out some of the bonehead mistakes. Tony's case, stop, just hold on to the ball. I think there is talent there around Kelsey, who's your main weapon, that they can do something, that they can actually be the normal offensive firepower kind of team that we're expected. And, we're through 2 weeks. They're 1-1. I'm really not worried about them. And, they're playing a team in the Bears that we'll talk about in a little bit that I think they're going to right the ship this week. I think they're going to be fine. I was more a little bit concerned on the Jacksonville side because I expect this team, this is my number 1 seed that I predicted in the AFC this year. I expected them to not win this game, but to play a lot better than this at home. And that's something that, hey, it's the Chiefs, right? They've lost to them, 3 times in the last calendar year. Maybe it's a team they're just not ready to beat yet, clearly, right? But now can we bounce back this week? Now can we move forward and just put this game behind us, or does this become a little bit of a trend? I think that's something worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah, well, we'll get to our picks later, but they have obviously a very winnable game. It's a divisional matchup, which those can be unpredictable. CJ Stroud has looked pretty good.
Well.
He's certainly shown some signs for Houston, so I expect that to be an interesting game tomorrow, and, we'll see what happens.
I agree. I think by far Stroud has been the best rookie quarterback so far that we have seen. Brian, did you have a game that you wanted to transition over to and talk about?
Yeah, I think kind of fitting since we talked about the Chiefs. Let's stick in their division and head to the Denver Broncos. They've gotten plenty of airtime on our program here for not all the right reasons.
Because
no, this Bronco team just continues to struggle, and you thought, Sean Payton coming in, that he'd quote-unquote change the culture and the offense would be improved, which it might be. I mean, after all, the team scored 33 points in this game last week, and you would think, okay, if they're going to score 33, well, that should be good enough to handle Sam Howell and company, and it turned out it was not. Now, this was a game they got off to a considerable lead, right? I think it was 21-3 at one point.
They were leading at halftime. They were looking great.
You'd think the Broncos are home free. Well, second half, different story. Commanders get back in the game. Howell really played well, made some big plays. Terry McLaurin, a good game. They've got some good weapons. They've got Chase Young back in the mix on defense. It's a team that we talked about before the season, even though we projected them as a last-place team, not by any means without ability. And, they showed in this game, they rally, they take the lead, and then you get to the craziness with the Broncos and the Hail Mary of just desperation that gets tipped a couple of times, falls into the hands of wide receiver Brandon Johnson, and then the Broncos need a 2-point conversion to tie, and the 2-point try fails. Now, you probably saw the play. It looked like maybe you could say pass interference on the play. I mean, was it egregious? No. Could they have called it? Yes. But the bottom line is it's another loss for the Broncos and an 0-2 start. Both games at home against the Raiders and Commanders. Not exactly the class of the league. Not the way you want to start the Sean Payton era.
No, I completely agree. I mean, we've seen that with a couple calls this week, right? I think of the Lions-Seahawks game, was Hutchinson held at the end in overtime on the touchdown to lock it. I mean, there was some calls that kind of, were they let him play, per se. But I could see people's arguments there for sure, and I would definitely listen to those arguments. Yeah, this is not good, Brian. The Broncos are in a lot of trouble. Did I expect huge things out of them this season? No, I didn't project them to make the playoffs. I had them in third place. But to have 2, in my mind, winnable games, especially the way that they played, right? Their first 3 drives against the Commanders in the first half, touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. They're up 21-3. And then really the game takes a turn, right? You're in the second quarter. Wilson gets sacked. He fumbles the ball. Commanders go down the field. Boom, touchdown. Then the next time, right before the end of the first half, field goal. And that was it. Those 2 moments right there, really the fumble, would turn the entire game on its head. And this Commanders team comes out in the second half. Completely different team. The Broncos also completely different team in the second half. And they just... you look at Wilson's numbers in the first half. He's great. I mean, slinging it around huge yards. I mean, just great. Mm-hmm. And then he comes in the second half, and his completion percentage is like below 50%. He's throwing for like under 100 yards in the second half. It's not good. And you take out that Hail Mary, which is kind of just one of these fluke plays, right? That
right.
happens. it was a very poor performance. You know, you like to see teams, of course, play well in all four quarters, but I like to see teams that finish well. And to me, it is the sign of uh, part coaching and part are your players getting the message when you come out in the second half after you're supposed to, be talking in the halftime locker room and you're a little bit more off script, you're playing it a little bit more free, right? They've had time to make halftime adjustments and you lay an egg at home. I mean, and now it doesn't get easier for the Broncos. I mean, you still have to play the Chargers twice, which we could talk about them. The Chiefs, of course, twice. The Raiders, who always beat you, who beat you to start the season, one more time. You have a stacked AFC. It's not going to get any easier for them. And it just makes me wonder, like, you're kind of married to Wilson, but is Sean Payton? Not really. And does that start getting a little bit ugly the more and more losses potentially pile up for this team?
Yeah, certainly possible. And the other thing I think that stands out when you look at Wilson's line is, yes, he had some big completions. He threw for over 300 yards. Completion percentage wasn't overly outstanding, but sacked 7 times.
Awesome.
It's hard to win when you get sacked that many times.
I think that's part that this offensive line is not great. It's a work in progress. That's why they spent money this offseason and kind of getting McGlitchy. And it's just, it hasn't worked entirely. But also, it's also partly Wilson, too, right? Like, he's got
holding onto the ball. Yeah.
He's holding on to the ball way too long. We could talk about this with Justin Fields, and we will in a little bit. Like, there's at a point that internal clock's got to get going, and that ball has to be out. You got to go your 3-step, 5-step, 7-step drop. You hit that back foot, that ball's out. And it just doesn't seem like that timing is there. And I think we're only 2 weeks in, right? But given last year and 2 weeks, I'm not ready to completely call it yet. But I think it brings up the question, Bri, of like, I don't know if old Russell Wilson's coming back. Like, no. I think this Wilson is the Wilson we just, like, he might get marginally better, but I think this might be the Wilson that we just have to get used to. Like, he's just not going to be this all-pro MVP caliber guy anymore that we saw in Seattle.
Oh, I'm with you. I think that guy is not coming back. Part of it is, like, the skill set that he had in Seattle, he just doesn't have as he ages now and gets into his middle 30s. And, the team around him is just not as good as what he had in Seattle. And you could change the coach, bring in an offensive mind like Sean Payton, one of the best in the game, was a great tandem with Drew Brees for so many years, those high-flying offenses. But I agree. It doesn't look like it's going to happen. Division's too good. I don't see the Broncos making a lot of noise this year.
No, but I didn't expect them to go out this quietly. And you played 2 games at home. I mean, you couldn't start worse this season. They're in for a lot more turbulence going on there. I did want to, though, before we went to another game, I want to give the Commanders their props. I mean, this is a team that I think a lot of people projected to be in 4th place. They expected them to be dead, to not do anything. All right, it's Sam Howell. I mean, we're talking about, what, a 5th-round pick here? I mean, what is this guy going to do? And you know what? He's played well. They've played well. This defense through 2 weeks, Bri, knock on wood for them, they've been great. They've been healthy. They've been everything you expect all of these first-round picks to actually be. And Chase Young playing in a contract year, right? He doesn't have any long-term deal. He's in the last year. They didn't pick up his option. I love what they're doing down there in Washington, and I think they deserve that credit. There's a lot of talent on this team, Bri. I mean, from Dotson and McLaurin, Brian Robinson at the running back. I think Howell's playing well. They got a pretty damn good offensive line, and as I said, the defense, I think they deserve some props too, given that they've been the most you want to talk about turbulence, one of the more turbulent franchises, and let's just condense it to the last 5 years. They had a change of ownership in the offseason. Yeah. And they did this through 2 weeks, through 2-0. They deserve some credit.
Yeah, I really think that did help the ownership change. There's just so much negativity with Daniel Snyder and everything that was going on there. It was just time to
ugly.
Get him out of there, make a change regardless of who it was, and it just kind of feels like a fresh start for the organization. And Ron Rivera is a guy, he's not an elite head coach, but he keeps teams afloat. We
Took
saw
a
it
team to the
in
Super Bowl.
Carolina.
Yeah.
Right, he had some winning years. He got to a Super Bowl. He's not a bad head coach. Now, he's not a guy that you expect to win year in and year out big with, but I think he is a guy that can keep a team afloat, and I think he is the right guy for this team right now, and they're playing well early on.
And you know who also deserves a shout out here, Bry? Eric Bieniemy. Okay, this offensive coordinator, this man could not, for whatever reason, we don't know all the details, but maybe he didn't interview well. I mean, who knows? Maybe teams were just, they questioned his ability because everyone said, I mean, is he really calling plays there? It's kind of like Andy Reid and Mahomes, right? He had to make a lateral move, right? He didn't get a promotion. He literally left a Super Bowl caliber champion, roster and a champion of last year, just to move somewhere so he could get a little bit of recognition and maybe one day get that head coaching job. I think through 2 weeks, I know it's early, I think what he's done with this offense, there was a lot of reports of him in training camp. Oh, he's being too hard on players. Oh, they're not accustomed to what's going on. Well, you know what? It's working. And you know what? Sometimes these guys are caught a little much and they need a little bit of tough love. And if he's an old school kind of mentality guy, which he seems to be from what we've heard from former players, I think he deserves a little bit of flowers too, the way that he has Sam Howell playing almost another 300 yards this past week.
That, and I think combined with the fact that he's getting some balance to this offense, you don't want them to be too one-dimensional. Teams are rarely going to be successful. We know it's a passing league, it's a quarterback-driven league, but when you can get a balanced offense where you can get the running game involved, and you look at the numbers like in their last game against Denver, productive game from Brian Robinson, you mentioned him, good game for him on the ground to go along with the passing numbers from Howell. I think that gives you positive feelings that they can be a good team going forward because they can get productivity both in the pass and the running game.
No, I think it's an excellent point. It's scary, like, looking at the numbers here, right? Like, what really tells the tale at the end of the day is not only execution, but a little bit more time of possession that Washington had. I mean, look at these numbers. Total yards for the game. Washington, 388 to 399 for Denver. Passing yards, 266 for Washington, 277 for Denver. 122 rush yards exactly each for both teams. Yards per play, both 6 exactly. And then you look at third down percentage, Washington 30%, Denver 33%. Penalties 8 to 9 in favor of Washington. Like, they were neck and neck. And what's the tails there? It's execution, it's time possession, and it's 2 turnovers by the Denver Broncos. There's your ball game. Like, there's your ball game right there. And that shows that, like, I expect more out of the Denver Broncos and Sean Payton. And if they're not going to give it to me, I'm going to give credit to people like Washington that, hey, there's surprise teams every now and again in the NFL. And with whatever's going on with the Giants, this could be a sneaky wild card team. I'll just say it through 2 weeks. I mean, you never know.
I think that's fair.
All right, Brian, let's go over to another game here that I really wanted to talk about. I mean, there was so many interesting picks that we could have jumped into this game. But you know what? And I'm sorry to anyone here in Chicago that possibly might be listening, but we got to talk about the Bears, right? Bucks, Bears, Bucks end up, getting, you want to talk about sneaky teams. Bucks, 27-17 victory here, 2-0. Baker Mayfield looking pretty good. We'll talk about that in just a second. But these Bears, Brian, I mean, have we ever heard in a week period between games, less than a week, a team that underwent more situations, more turbulence, more negative things happen to the team? I mean, of course, you start with, right, you had the Justin Fields comments, right, which a ton of people took out of context. He wasn't straight up calling out coaches. Now, what he said, was it fantastic? No, I think there's more of a diplomatic way he could have said it, right? But he wasn't straight up saying, it's not me, it's the coaching. It was more like he feels like he's being overloaded with information, right? Luke Getsy's the offensive coordinator. They're in the second year over there, and he feels like he's not being able to play free. And I think we could both agree through 2 weeks, if you've watched any highlights or the actual game tape of the Chicago Bears, Fields is not running. He's holding the ball way too long. I mean, he's missing, Bri. If you look at the old 22 film, wide open guys. I mean, guys that are like, they're right there in the flat. They're standing right there. It should be in his line of sight, and he's holding it, boom, takes a sack. Tries to run, takes a sack. He feels like he's playing constricted, and there's too much on him and in his head.
Yeah.
So I think that's more what he meant about the coaching. But nevertheless, it still made headlines. He still had to walk it back, had to address it. Teammates had to address it. You had all that going on, right? Then you have Alan Williams, the former defensive coordinator for them. He resigns after 2 weeks. There's crazy, horrible stories coming out all over online, all over Twitter about maybe what happened to him. Was there an FBI raid? Was there all this other unspeakable stuff that I won't talk about? Turns out all that stuff doesn't seem to be true, right? But something happened. Something with him to have enough want to get a legal team for them to issue a statement. Something that the Bears had to know about enough after he resigned that they scrubbed him from everything on the team website, and they gave a one sentence kind of press release about his time in Chicago. There's something that happened there, and more details will come out as it is. We're not here to talk about the legality of what he went through, but still, huge distraction. One of the leaders, one of the leading coaches of your team, your defensive coordinator, boom, he's out the door after 2 weeks. I mean, they have just been thing after thing after thing. And then to top it off, this facility gets broken into, and robbers get away with over $100,000 of equipment. They knock down the security fence and they rob the Bears. And now, there was a whole bunch of jokes of, oh, I hope they rob the offensive playbook, right? Because of how bad they play. But regardless, you've had all of these things going on inside a 5-day period, and you're 0-2 against two teams that you lost to that are probably not going to be in the playoffs. Let's just be honest. So with all that being dropped on you in terms of context and for the audience, I mean, what do you make of the Bears going forward here, Bry?
That's a lot to digest there. I mean,
For sure.
There could go a lot of different ways. I mean, I think to start with the quarterback and Fields, the way you articulated it clearly leads me to believe that a lot of his issues are mental, which I think is probably more correctable than if you were watching the film and he was airmailing receivers left and right. I think I would rather see that there were receivers running wide open and he just didn't see them, because you would think that could be an issue that it's corrected. I mean, I don't know how easily. I mean, I think the team...
It's going to be tough.
I think the team clearly is in a lot of trouble. It just seems like they've gone completely backwards. It's a defense. I mean, we spend a lot of time focusing on the offensive struggles, but this defense gave up, 40 points to the Packers in week 1 on their home field? 38, and then they come back against a Baker Mayfield-led Bucs team and give up 27 points. Now, I know they gave up a pick 6, which you could go back to Fields, and that was just a horrendous interception.
It was horrible. And also, too, the offensive coordinator there in Luke Getsy, I think it was 2 or 3 straight plays in that game, and 2 plays in a row on that. He called the same exact play.
I saw
it's a professional defense you're against. Did you think that this professional defense was not going to notice? That's just bad. That's bad.
And then on the pick 6, I guess he's trying to dump it off to throw a screen pass to the running back, and there's Shaq Barrett to just snatch it with his 2 hands.
Good for him, man. Everything he went through in the offseason with losing his child and everything. Good for him, man.
And so obviously a big play for him. That sealed the win for the Bucs and sealed the 0-2 start for the Bears. And as you referenced before, oh, by the way, next up, with all this turmoil and all that's swirling on the inside and outside the organization, what do they get to go? Arrowhead Stadium.
Oh, easy. No problem. Easy.
Where they're basically a 2-touchdown underdog against Patrick Mahomes and company. So it doesn't get any easier, and it just looks like another lost year, this time probably earlier than we thought. I mean, look, I thought the team was capable of taking the next step with the young quarterback, maybe show some signs for the defense early on, though nothing has gone right.
No, this is bad. This is one of the worst kind of beginnings, given everything inside and outside the stadium I could think about. And remember, this was a very popular betting pick for a huge jump. I mean, I think would you had them what second if I
I
remember
did.
right.
I
So like
did.
so you were buying in too that like there's going to be some progression here. I mean, Justin Fields. I know it sounds funny now through 2 weeks. He was a dark horse MVP, very popular pick in betting circles and for
Oh
people
boy.
all over the internet. And I thought personally, I didn't want to be mean, but I thought that stuff was ridiculous. I still had them in fourth place. I just think, there is something about saying, you know, whether you believe in the NFL gods or not. And we talked about that last week. But, like, there's something to be said if you are a historically poorly run franchise in the NFL, you're probably going to go back to the mean on that. I mean, look at, no offense, but look at the Jets, the Browns, the Bears, the Cardinals. Like, these are teams that are just doormats. Like, I mean, this is what they do. And as soon as they have a little bit of hope, whether the universe or something else gets snatched away. And that's how I've always looked at the Bears. And I wasn't, they've made some progression. They tried to make some moves. They get more in there. Darnell Wright looked pretty good through his first 2 games. Now he's on IR, the offensive tackle they took in the first round. It's just like they can't have anything going well. And I thought what was key, I don't know if you saw this, maybe some of our audience saw this online. They also had mic'd up in that moment, and you heard a conversation between, I forget who it was, maybe it was Shaq Barrett, it was somebody, and DJ Moore. And they literally said, yeah, man, bro, they ain't using you right. And he goes, yeah, I know it. It's caught on audio right there and film.
Wow.
That like he's even saying with the coaches, like through 2 weeks, DJ Moore is already gone, yeah, they don't know how to use me at all. That's your number one offensive weapon. That's not good. Okay, you do not. We're not talking. We're 3 months into the season. We're at Thanksgiving, and it's like, all right, well, they're bad. That's it. 2 weeks of the season, you could not have had a worse start against two, I think, beatable opponents. One, you played at home. The Bucks, we had no respect for them through 2 weeks or before the season, and they look like they're going to be getting a possible first overall pick situation again. And I mean, hey, I don't think they're going to be getting rid of it this time. I don't think they're going to be giving it to, a la Carolina like they did last year. I think they're going to be staying in that spot and getting a quarterback again if this season keeps going sideways.
Quite possibly, yeah. I mean, I don't see how it gets much better, especially when you got the Chiefs coming up next, and you're basically going to be 0-3. Nobody gives you a chance to win that game. And
do you think they cover? Do you think they cover? Last I saw it was 12.5. Do you think they cover it?
No, I don't.
You think it's an absolute blowout? Yeah, that's
I
one of
think,
those.
I
Like,
think Chiefs by 20.
yeah, it's like one of those risky picks because like I hate huge spreads in the NFL and professional sports, but like that is one I took this weekend where I'm like, I know some people are doing the whole like, oh, the Bears will bounce back. I think they'll, and I'm like, I know that the Chiefs offense hasn't looked great. I think this is gonna be the first time they're gonna look pretty damn good. Brian, before we switch to another game, I did want to get your thoughts on what we think of the Bucks, what you think of the Bucks here, because as we said last week, we treated this team like an absolute doormat. How are you feeling about them now that they're 2-0 and Baker Mayfield's throwing for 300 yards? I mean, how you feeling there?
Well, they're definitely exceeded my expectations, as I think they have yours as well. I mean, clearly, like the Mike Evans situation was kind of uncertain coming into the year. He's suited up and has played, some of his best football. I mean, the numbers last week: 6 for 171 in his score. I mean, Baker could not have played much better. He was 26 of 34 in this game for 317. I think it's safe to say he kind of found something in his little stint with your team last year.
I agree with that.
And look, this is a guy who was a former number 1 overall pick for a reason. A team saw he had great talent. There were a lot of ups and downs, mostly downs, in his time in Cleveland and Carolina. But maybe, the light bulb has kind of gone off with Baker Mayfield, and I don't believe this team is going to be a playoff team by any means. But I will say that Baker, is capable of running an offense and winning football, which is probably better than I would have thought going into this season. And I think it's safe to say he kind of found something last year with what he was able to accomplish with the Rams.
Yeah, I think he really refound his confidence, right? Like I think he got back to what he does and the swag that he has. I think McVay instilled that back in him. I think that Raiders comeback 98-yard drive was a huge thing that was just like, hey, I still got it. The Broncos game where they blew them out there on Christmas Eve. They were like, okay. So there was something there. And I think what we forget and what I certainly forgot is like, this Bucs offensive line is definitely, it's gone through, it's a work in progress, right? They've had a lot of losses since Tom Brady was there. But there's talent on this team. I mean, White is looking good at running back. He's been completely unexpected, right? You got Auden, you got Mike, you got Chris Godwin. I mean, there's talent here, and this defense is also pretty damn good. There's a lot of good defensive players, and they're even a little banged up, and they're still playing that well. I don't have them as a playoff team still, but would I be shocked if I looked up at the end of the year and they were 8-9 or something like that? No. And for considering where I thought they would be, which would be like bottom 2 in the NFL this year, I have to say I'm thoroughly impressed, and that could earn Baker if he keeps playing like this, he's going to be the starter here for the foreseeable future. Or if the Bucs wanted to move on, he's definitely going to get a job trying to start somewhere else if he wanted to. If he keeps playing like this has proven that, hey, maybe with the right kind of talent, the right coaching, I am a franchise quarterback.
Yeah, and my take on the Bucks was for this year was partially based on what we saw last year, albeit with Tom Brady. That like it just felt like there was a malaise around this team where they did not have a lot of strong performances. There were a lot of games where you looked up and it was like, this team just doesn't look any good. And it was like, well, and after all, they're quarterbacked by Brady. They were good enough to sneak into the playoffs and, clearly had nothing left. They were bounced by the Cowboys in short order. But, so that I kind of used part of that as like, well, they played that poorly with Brady. What are they going to be now with the questionable Baker Mayfield? Well, they've gotten a good version of Baker Mayfield, and so far it's yielded good results.
Yeah, I think it was too, like, I remember watching last year. Remember that that Bucs 49ers game? I think it was Brock Purdy's first start, and they ended like 35-7, and they didn't even have a prayer in that game. And that's where I was just like, that was the first game. I know he hadn't played great up until that point, but that was the first game where I was like, I think Brady's done. Like, I think that's it. And they kind of limped on, barely made the playoffs, and we saw how that went. So I agree with you. I think part of it is like I didn't have a lot of respect because I figured like guys like Mike Evans, who's still in a contract year, right? Like they didn't give him his extension. I was like, all right, he's going to leave after this year. I mean, we talked in the first show, Mike Evans being a huge trade deadline candidate, right, to get out of Tampa Bay. And it seems to be anything but. And I have to say, this is the show, I guess, here in week 3 of giving teams props, giving guys props that we didn't hold in high regard here to start the season. They certainly deserve it. Brian, if you want to transition over, what's the fourth game on the docket from week 2 that you wanted to jump into?
Yeah, I was kind of going back and forth on a couple of picks, but I think we need to at least quickly mention here before we get into week 3 and our picks, the Giants and their impressive comeback. I mean, that was a game last week, and I know they played a game since, and it did not go very well, as we know, Thursday night.
Yeah, it was
in
rough,
San
as you
Francisco.
expected.
All right, you're going against a team that, I mean, I think is the best in the league, and watch those two teams line up against each other. It's abundantly clear the 49ers are just flat out better across the board, and that's the way the game played out. But before that, the Giants had a game where they somehow fell behind 28-7 in the desert.
20 nothing. They were outscored 60-0 through their first 6 quarters of the season.
And not only that, but you go back to the previous game, which was the playoff defeat in Philadelphia. They lost that game 38-7. You're talking about 2.5 games that were just awful. Annihilated.
Yeah.
And by the way, this against a team that everybody thinks is actively tanking. Now, the results through 2 games, they haven't played that poorly.
Well. They've played hard for Jonathan Gannon.
They have. You have to give Josh Dobbs some credit there. The quarterback, nobody necessarily expected to step into the role, but he's done well. But the bottom line in this game was the Giants get down big. I mean, nothing is going right. The offense can't get a running game going. Same story as the Dallas game with Jones, getting pressured. And then the defense could not stop anything. I mean, the Cardinals were just having their way, running the ball, passing it, doing whatever they wanted, and just getting out to this big lead. But then the Giants come storming back. Great second half performance by Jones. Barkley scores the key touchdown, of course, also ends up getting hurt, which is obviously a big blow. Now, it doesn't sound like his absence is going to be.
It seems like he'll be all right. Yeah.
Right. It seems like he may even have a chance to play their next game a week from Monday when they play Seattle.
Yeah.
It seems like there's kind of conflicting reports. Is it a high ankle sprain or not? The last I heard, he called it a high ankle sprain, which that would lead you to believe it's a longer term absence, but then again, who knows? But give the Giants credit. They come storming back. Jones does have a great performance. The Giants finally show some signs of life, which they badly needed after the start that we documented, and they do get a win. Couldn't really turn it into much momentum the next Thursday, but that was quite a comeback last Sunday afternoon.
I mean, hey, I just said it's the show of giving guys their credit, and regardless of what happened this past Thursday here to start Week 3, that's the best Daniel Jones has ever looked. I mean, let's just be real. Like this offense, this team was dead in the first half. I was like, I was saying at my house, I was like, man, if they don't come back in this game, they lose to the Cardinals. I was like, heads are gonna roll here. This is gonna be bad to start the year. And for Jones, I mean, look at these numbers here: 17 of 21 for 259, 2 touchdown passes. Also ran for 58 yards, and ran a 14-yard rushing. Oh, that was for the game? No, that was for the second half. That was in the second half of the game, what he did in one half of football. He was fantastic. I mean, I wouldn't regard this Giants offense as elite. I don't look at them and go, man, look at all these weapons that they have. And for him to do that against, I don't care it's the Cardinals. That's still a professional football team over there with Jonathan Gannon. Has these guys playing hard. I got to give credit to Daniel Jones. Now, we could talk a little bit and kind of tongue-in-cheek a little bit of the story that was going around. Like, did Brian Daboll call the plays there in the second half or not? I don't know if you saw some of that online, but they were questioning it. He avidly denied it after the game, but teams said that they were studying the tape there in the second half and saying like, oh, it looked like he was. Whoever was, that was the best Jones ever looked. They looked great, and I'm glad at least that they could get off kind of the mat and actually show a little bit of life here in the 2023 season. And, the Cardinals, I think it's props to them to just say, hey, they played hard, because you're going to be saying that a lot here for the 23 season.
Yeah, it's like, little kids pat them on the back, tried hard, give them a trophy.
Yeah, participation trophy.
Right. So yeah, good win for them. I will say one thing on the Giants before we move on to the picks. Little concerned about the start of the Giants' career of Darren Waller. I don't think he's played very good football. Numbers haven't been there, but if you watch the game on Thursday night, there were a couple of plays where it just didn't look like he fought for the ball, which that's a problem. Now there was one where he's a big target. It was kind of a high ball, not one that is a 90% catch, but one that if you're a good player, you probably should come down with. But there was a worse one where it was like a third and long, and it would have been a nice 15-yard play, and it just went off his hands. So I mean, this was a guy that they brought in to help Jones, to be kind of the go-to weapon in the passing game. Early on, the returns are not great.
No, I agree with that. I mean, you look at it, he had 7 targets, right? He led the team in targets. So it's not like they're not trying to get him the ball. And yeah, he's got to step up, right? I mean, you have Barkley out in this game, and Thursday game. You also had Andrew Thomas out. Evan Neal has been kind of a disaster, right, since they drafted him. I mean, that kind of seems like a miss of a pick. I mean, who could have called that? I mean, who knows? But I expect him to improve. He's a good player. I think he's in a pretty good headspace right now. This Giants just team at the moment is just they're lost in all sorts of ways, and it's why I expected them to have a rough year. It's why I didn't pick them to go back to the playoffs, and I think outside of playing San Francisco, who's probably the best team in the league, they'll fix it in week 4, right? Like they're going to start looking better. They're going to get more healthy, but not an ideal start to the season. And hey, at least you're 1-2 and not 0-3, right?
Right.
Brian, let's get to some picks here for week 3. We talked about the aforementioned, obviously, opening game of week 3 on Thursday night where the Niners won 30-12. I saw there was some people that I understand, as I said earlier, it's a little bit worrisome, right? It's a little bit risky when you kind of take on all the points when you're betting, because the spread, I think, was like 10.5 in that game. I easily took the 10.5 of the Niners. I was like, this game is not going to even be remotely close. Like, why do people all of a sudden with Barkley and Andrew Thomas out think like, oh, these boys, they're going to play hard. It's going to be a close game. I'm like, no, it's not. I mean, you can play this game. It doesn't matter that this game is in San Francisco. You play this game on the moon. I mean, like, they're getting blown out. Like, what are we talking about? So
short week on the West Coast, and the ingredients were all there for 49ers.
There's just sometimes, Brian, like we're in no means professionals, but we try to be educated as we can for our audience when people are listening. And there's sometimes that these sports pundits who have way more experience than us in media for decades, they say some stuff, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like how even remotely would you think this game is going to be close? It's crazy. Anyway, let's go over to the 1:00 games, Bri. Here, we'll start these for tomorrow. Colts Ravens. I think this is a pretty intriguing matchup, and we know Gardner Minshew is getting the start. Anthony Richardson, who I keep saying this is why you need to stop running here through your first 2 weeks. He's out with a concussion. He did not clear protocol. Ravens. There's kind of a mixed bag on them, right? Like some people think they've looked super dominant. Other people, and I kind of fall more towards this camp, go, they've looked okay, right? Like there's some moments in there, particularly against Cincinnati last week, and not as much against Houston. It's a fascinating game. I think this is going to be an interesting one. Not going to just be some random blowout, but I'm still taking the Ravens. I think they're going to cover the spread. I think it's 6.5, I believe, the last time I saw it. And I think we're going to see this Lamar offense keep clicking, keep finding the way under Tom Monken.
Yeah, well, we're starting with the first game, and we already have to cue the music that we don't have queued up.
What?
But this is the lock of the week. You know, I was going through. I didn't really see a lot of good choices for the lock of the week this week. Now, I bounced back. We both did in week 2 with our locks of the week. As you picked the Giants, well, you had to sweat that one out.
I sweated that out.
I did not have a sweat. I had an easy win. The Raiders scored the first touchdown, led 7-0, final score 38-10 Buffalo. Yeah, so that was an easy win.
This is your lock of the week, huh?
This is my lock of the week. Colts going with a backup quarterback, Gardner Minshew. Not a bad backup. I mean, we've seen him play Philly, Jacksonville. He's certainly had his moments, but I just feel like the Ravens at home here, I think this is a spot where Lamar Jackson is primed for a big game. I don't think the Colts have what it takes to stop him by any means. I think Baltimore at home wins, and it's not so much an indictment on the Colts as it is I don't see a lot of great choices this week for the lock. So that's what I'm going with.
Go over another 1:00 game. Titans Browns. We saw. It's been the curse of the Monday night here to start the season.
3 straight,
like just crazy stuff dating back to last season of just like what is going on Monday Night Football. It makes me not only I feel for all those guys, of course. I wish them the best of health, but I also my team's playing Monday night. Like Jesus, like what is gonna happen? Like we got to break the streak of this, but we see the awful injury of Nick Chubb. I mean, I think it's interesting that. They came out finally today on Saturday, and they said, like, we think it's just an MCL tear, 6 to 8 month recovery, but they're not even entirely sure still what's wrong fully with his knee. It does not appear to be career-threatening, which, I mean, that was a gruesome, disgusting injury that, you never want to see any guy go through there. And given the way that, the Browns, they looked pretty lifeless on offense. Watson has looked bad. I mean, even them beating the Bengals, I kind of chalked it up to, week 1, it was raining, blah, blah, blah. I mean, he's dirting balls, skipping them. He has a couple personal foul penalties in this game. He kind of pushed the ref, which I don't know how he didn't get ejected. He's sticking his fingers and face mask. I mean, stuff that is unbecoming. You normally do not see of a quarterback. And the Titans, hey, I don't have a ton of respect for them, but you know what? One thing I'll give them, they are coached super well. And when I say ton of respect, I mean in terms of their quarterback and kind of their offensive firepower. I expect them to go into Cleveland, win this game. There's no Nick Chubb. They signed Kareem Hunt. Who knows if he's going to even play? And I expect the Titans being the better coach team, the team that's got a little bit more momentum, the team that historically over the last few years has played significantly better. They're going to go in. They're going to win this game.
I saw a Pro Football Talk tweet after that bizarre game, and that's what it was, that Browns-Steelers game. I mean, there were
Really
so
weird.
many weird things that were going on there.
The Steelers were terrible on offense. It was a weird game.
Terrible. They had 2 defensive touchdowns, including the first play of the game, the pick 6 of Watson. But I saw a Pro Football Talk tweet that Watson should be fined about $1 billion after this game with all the infractions. But I'm with you. We're sharing a brain here. That was kind of an old loudmouths term, but Adam Shine and Chris Carlin years ago. But we are here. I'm going Tennessee. The loss of Chubb is huge. I don't think it can be.
He was off to another great start to the year again.
Yeah, and it's just a shame because he's been such a workhorse as a running back, so fun to watch, and really the key to that team rather than the quarterback over the last few years. So yeah, I'm going Tennessee on the road. They have the healthy beast mode, running back with Derrick Henry.
Yep.
Hopefully for Ryan Tannehill, it's a game where he can handle the football, not turn it over. Close game, I definitely see. I mean, low scoring. There's going to be a lot of bad weather to deal with on the East Coast.
That's an important point that you said right there. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm with you, Tennessee.
Yeah, and I also will say, I saw some things online saying like, oh, that was a dirty hit to Chubb. It wasn't. Mika Fitzpatrick, I don't think that was a dirty hit. And guys came out and say it was not. Also sucks for Chubb. Same exact knee that he hurt on a very, kind of similar move with his knee, unnatural move in college. So, you hate to see that, and I hope he could come back as strong as ever. But, man, it's going to be an uphill climb for the Browns, man. It really is. And it sucks, too, because that defense is pretty damn good. So it really sucks that this offense can't live up to its billing. Falcons-Lions, Bri, this is an interesting game because I had a lot of high hopes in the Lions. But, last week, Goff, third longest streak ever without a pick, it looked like he thought his receiver was going one way. It was a miscommunication. The pick 6 ends up turning the whole game. And now the Lions go into this game at home still. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, a few other guys injured, not playing in this game. They're banged up already. And this Falcons team, I think quietly, 2-0. They've played pretty well. I'm taking the Falcons. I think they're going to run heavy, keep this game away from the Lions. The Lions are a little beat up both physically and emotionally, and I think they're going to suffer a second straight loss at home. I'm taking the Falcons.
Interesting. You surprised me there. I'm going the other way. It's interesting because you, I believe, had the Lions as your division winner in the NFC North, while I is definitely not as high on them. The 2 teams that I thought everybody was too high on were the Lions and the Jaguars. We'll see how it plays out. But I do think Detroit bounces back this week. I don't see them losing back-to-back at home. I still like the way the offense is playing. I know that the pick 6 was a killer last week. Not exactly sure the status of Amon-Ra St. Brown. He kind of got dinged up in the game last week. Obviously, he's an important part of the offense, but Goff overall has been playing pretty well. I think he's going to be able to have his way with a suspect Atlanta defense. Yeah. Gibbs will be handling the mail. Running backs, Montgomery's been out last week and seems like he's going to miss a second straight game. I like Detroit to win this one.
They're expecting St. Brown to play the toe injury. That's what they're saying is the latest update there. All right, our first disagreement. So we'll go to the Saints-Packers. I think this is going to be an interesting game. The Packers, another team that's very beat up here. I like them. I picked them second place for the division. I like what I've seen so far. I think Jordan Love has been pretty decent, but no Aaron Jones, no Bakhtiari. Watson has been banged up here. Christian Watson at wide receiver. I think we're underestimating the Saints a little bit. I certainly have underestimated them. This defense This defense is good, man. This defense is one of the best in the league. I mean, dating back to last season, I think they're like 10 straight games now. They've held opponents 20 points or under. That's ridiculous. Like that is amazing no matter who you're playing in the NFL. And I expect New Orleans to go into Green Bay. It's not going to be frigid cold. We're still in September, and with the Packers beat up, I think the Saints are going to come out with a victory here, even though that offense has not looked great in New Orleans.
Yeah, it's an interesting game. You think back to when this game would have had so many points scored with
Right?
Rodgers quarterbacking the Packers, Breeze with the Saints. They had some great matchups
Great.
over the years. But now we fast forward and it's Jordan Love and it's Derek Carr. Definitely a little bit of a lesser matchup offensively. But I'm with you. I'm taking the Saints. I think the Packer issues injury wise are clearly going to bite them here. Expect certainly a fired up Lambeau Field. It's the home opener for the
Yeah.
Packers here in week 3. Close game, but I'm trusting Derek Carr a little bit more than Jordan Love, especially with the injuries around Love. I kind of like some of the weapons Carr has around him. Chris Olave is becoming a number one receiver
He's
before
great.
our very eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually they're going to get Kamara back. We know not
After
yet,
this week.
but I like this Saint team. I think they're going to win this division. And if they're going to do that, they're going to need to win games like this.
Yeah.
I'll take the Saints.
For sure, they have to just play better offensively. They haven't looked great through 2 weeks, and maybe that's some growing pains. We'll have to see. But that defense is fired up, man. And hey, first Lambeau game, like you said, in the post Rodgers era. That's gonna be a lot of fun there.
Yeah.
Texans Jags. It's an interesting game as we mentioned earlier. C.J. Stroud probably playing. I'd say definitely playing the best out of all of the rookie QBs. He's been great, but this Texans team still doesn't have a ton of talent, and I expect the Jags to bounce back, win this game after a tough offensive showing last week against the Chiefs, and they're going to win this game closer than you think, but still probably about a touchdown.
I'm with you too. Like I picked Jacksonville to win. The spread is 7.5. I kind of lean toward the Texans keeping this one close. I'm not necessarily sold on Jacksonville offensively. Come off a game where they only score 7. Like I don't think this is a lock to them go out and score 30 points in this game. So I could see Houston keeping it within striking distance. Stroud certainly has played well. Anthony Richardson has played well too for the
He
Colts.
has. You just got to stay healthy.
Quarterbacks, right? That's the problem. He's out. Stroud's battled through this little injury. He's going with Nico Collins. Had a big game last week at wide receiver. I think
shout out Tank Dell as well.
They've got some young playmakers, but I am with you in Jacksonville getting the win.
Broncos Dolphins. You could argue, Bry, the Dolphins have looked like a top 3 team, maybe the best team. You could say right up there with the Niners in the league, which is ironic because their head coach came from the San Francisco staff, and Mike McDaniels. I really like what I've seen out of them. Now, they are not going to have Jalen Waddle in this game. He was ruled out. He suffered, unfortunately, a late concussion in that game against New England on Sunday night, so he will not be playing tomorrow. But as we talked about earlier, the Broncos are an absolute mess, and we know teams, you go down to Miami in September, it is so freaking hot on that field. The Dolphins are going to have a superior advantage to a team that's used to the cold weather up a mile above sea level. I see the Dolphins winning this game pretty damn easily.
Yeah, and it's another home opener. Miami opens up with the wins at the Chargers and then at New England last Sunday night. I'm taking Miami as well. I kind of would temper expectations for the Dolphins offense just because, you can focus more on Tyreek Hill with Waddle out of the lineup. Probably closes up some of the big plays that Miami can produce in the passing game, but you said it. I mean, you just can't feel very confident in anything about Denver. So the pick is the Dolphins.
You're going to see Heat starting to go there. If they lose again, they're 0-3. Speaking of that, and Heat kind of kicking up on losing teams, what becomes an interesting game for all the wrong reasons that we would have expected before the season started.
Yeah.
The Chargers and the Vikings are both 0-2. LA going into Minnesota. I mean, these are two teams that had playoff aspirations. Both made the playoffs last year. Both are supposed to have two very high-flying offenses, and yet both have underperformed. Now, the crazy thing is, both teams have played well offensively in 2 games. It's their defenses that have been atrocious. And it has been critical moments where they needed to make a play. They just haven't done it. And that is a big deal. And Bri, I don't expect heads to roll if the Vikings lose, right? If they go 0-3, I actually, Kevin O'Connell's in his second year. Kirk Cousins is in the contract year. Who knows if they're even keeping him after this season, all that stuff, right? You're going through some growing pains. You don't have, Dalvin Cook, you let him walk. They traded actually for Cam Akers this week from the Rams. So he's found a new home. We don't know if he'll end up suiting up this week, but all that's to be expected. And honestly, in the NFC, I still, even if they were 0-3, I kind of give them a shot. The Chargers are completely opposite. You're not winning your division. That's clear. It was clear even before the season started. It's even clearer now. AFC is stacked, even regardless of all the injuries that have happened. You can't go 0-3. And Brandon Staley, the heat has been turned up even before the season started, dating back to 2 years ago when they could have made the playoffs and blew it against the Raiders, right? Where they could have tied, blew that. Then you have the historic comeback that the Jags led against them in the playoff game that they easily should have won given how much they were up. Now you're 0-2. He's already talking and having issues with the media. He's supposed to be a defensive specialist. His defense have looked absolutely awful. There's a lot of pressure on both these teams, particularly the Chargers. I'm taking the Vikings in this game. I think that pressure is going to mount even more for the Chargers. Do not be surprised that this continues. Right around that trade deadline, about halfway through the season, Brandon Staley's fired midseason.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you have to consider him as the coach who is on the hottest seat right now. I don't think there's any question. And I'm with you. I'm taking the Vikings. Like, do I feel great about it? No. I mean, this was a game like when I went through the schedule, there's a lot of games where it's like, okay, I feel pretty good about this one. I got to Chargers, Vikings, and I'm like, I just don't know. It just feels like a matchup of the two teams. Who's going to screw it up more? And when that's the case, I bet the Chargers to screw it up more. Plus, I get the fact that the Vikings are at home. That gives me a little more confidence in them. Oh, by the way, the Chargers still without Austin Eckler, and it seems like he may be out for a few weeks. So that just continues to be a problem for them. I'm taking the Vikings.
Yeah. It's going to be a very interesting press conference if the Chargers lose this game. I will be front and center tuning into that one. Bri, another game that might hurt your soul is the Patriots-Jets. As you mentioned earlier, the Jets have lost 14 straight times to the New England Patriots. Zach Wilson, we saw how this went 2 games last year against the Patriots. All right, now it's crazy to think about. Patriots are 0-2 coming in this game. The Jets are 1-1, and it somehow feels like the Jets season is more over than the Patriots season. I mean, it's just like the balloon, especially after last week, has just been completely deflated.
Yeah.
You might hate me here, but not only I'm picking the Patriots, this is my lock of the week.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the Patriots, they're not going to lose their streak here. Bill is not going 0-3. I have absolutely zero faith in Zach Wilson to win this game, regardless if it's at home. I'm taking the Patriots. I think it's going to be a very ugly game, as you mentioned. This Northeast weather is going to be bad for a lot of these outdoor teams here on the coast. But I'm picking the Patriots to win it for a 15th time. My lock of the week.
Well, listen. I not necessarily surprised you picked the Patriots. I have to admit I'm a little surprised it's the lock of the week.
Yeah.
I think you're gonna fall to 1-2 in your locks of the week. There's just certain times where you have a feeling about a game. And look, I know that I root for this team, but I just have that feeling about the Jets this week that we're gonna get a big effort from this defense. And I think the fact that they're playing in these mess of conditions actually works to both teams' benefit because they can basically take the ball out of the hands of their quarterbacks that I don't think either one of them likes too much. With Mac Jones and Zach Wilson, the Patriots can focus on their running game with Ramondre Stevenson, and the Jets, with their 2 backs, get Breece Hall involved after, 4 touches last week. Clearly, he thought that was unacceptable. He's grumbling about it. He's a playmaker. He needs the ball. It's now week 3, I think they get him the ball, running game working, and I really just see a big-time effort from this defense at home. I think the Jets put an end to that streak with a big performance. Not necessarily expecting anything big from Zach Wilson. He just can't screw it up. I mean, that's basically the theme from here on out with Zach Wilson. But I just have a feeling it's going to be a big Jets effort. I'm going Jets.
Honestly, I hope for you. I mean, he didn't look that bad through the first, 2.5, 3 quarters of last week, and then he throws 3 picks, and we saw how that game went sideways real fast. So yeah, it's gonna be an ugly weather game. I really hope for you guys, but I think it's gonna be a long afternoon for your New York Jets.
We shall see.
The Bills Commanders, another game that's probably gonna be played in some subpar conditions. I actually think this is gonna be an interesting game. We gave the Commanders all their props. If I was doing the spread, I actually take the Commanders. I think it's about 6.5 here. But if we're picking straight up, as we do on this show, I'm taking the Bills. I think they're going to continue their winning ways. I think this is going to be about a 4 or 5 point game. I think it's going to be pretty close. It's going to be very ugly. Going to be a lot of running, a lot of defense in this game. But I'm taking the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, there's a lot of times when you go through your analysis, I'm thinking like I agree with everything you say, which doesn't necessarily make for the most interesting podcast, but I am glad we did have at least a few disagreements, so that made it a little more interesting. But I totally agree. Like the 6 points, I'm not comfortable taking the Bills to cover that number. We talked about Washington, how impressed we've been with them. They're at home here. This team is 2-0. I definitely think they keep this game close. Would not at all be surprised if they pulled off the upset. But I do think the Bills, the way they bounce back as big as they did last week, just really looked like vintage Bills, vintage Josh Allen, and their annihilation 38-10 last week. I think they proved they still are an upper echelon team. Will be good enough to win this game, but I agree with you. It's tight.
Yeah, he needed that, Josh Allen. He absolutely needed that last week, especially after that nightmarish game one and second half that he had against your Jets. Yeah, I mean, hey, even if there are similar thoughts that we have, you got to speak our truth here, and that's what we do here on this podcast here. The 4 o'clock games start off with a 4:05 game of the Panthers against the Seahawks. We know Panthers are not having Bryce Young play. He's going to be out with an ankle injury, which is not another blow to the rookie QB class. 2 of our 3 first-round picks not playing this week, and Anthony Richardson is out as well, as we talked about. I'm taking the Seahawks. I don't think this game up in Seattle is going to be that close. I think the Panthers are still kind of licking their wounds from when they just played the other night, and I see the Seahawks winning this one pretty comfortably.
Yeah, I will say for Carolina, I don't think it really is that much of a downgrade having Dalton in. I mean, Bryce Young, overmatched might be a little strong, but he has not been good through 2 weeks. It's clearly going to be a lot of growing pains with him if he ever even becomes the guy they thought he could be as a number 1 overall pick. That certainly is very much an open question. Dalton, you know what you're going to get. He's been in this league for a while. He can turn the ball over. He also is capable of making plays. That said, it's in Seattle and the harsh environment. The Rams certainly had their way week 1. I don't see Seattle dropping 2 home games here in 3 tries against a team that they're better than. With Dalton playing, I think the Seahawks get the win.
Yeah, I will say in the Bryce Young thing, this might be the worst offensive grouping of players in the National Football League, right up there with kind of the Cardinals. There's really not a lot of weapons on this team, so you got to give them that. The offensive line has been bad. I mean, they're bad. They've definitely regressed in some key positions. But hey, this is a concern that people had, right? Bryce Young is small, and in going into your 3rd week of your professional career, you're already missing a game. It's not good. It's not good. The 4:25 games are the Cardinals and the Cowboys. The Cowboys go visit the Cardinals. I know the Cowboys went through a huge loss this week, right? Trayvon Diggs, their star corner, all-pro corner, gets hurt in practice. You never want to see a player get hurt. You especially do not want to see them get hurt in practice. Torn ACL, he is out for the season. That's a blow. That matters.
Yeah.
But it does not matter against subpar competition. And even though the Cardinals have played really well, they're still one of the doormats of the league this year. I think the Cowboys are going to win pretty comfortably. And you know what? This is a game where through the first 2 weeks, the offense hasn't had to do much. You're going to have to pick up a little bit more of the slack now with the Diggs injury, even though that defense is still very good. This is a game to show out, Dak Prescott. Put that on your radar. I'm taking the Cowboys.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's clearly a blow. The kind of playmaker that he is in that secondary was getting better too in coverage, not just interceptions. But they have so much talent on the defensive side that they'll miss him, but it's not one where it cripples the unit. They're going to be fine without him. This game, I may surprise you now. Look, I am not picking the
Okay,
Arizona
okay.
Cardinals,
I was about to stop the script.
but I honestly believe this game could be a little closer than people think for a couple reasons. I think this is kind of a classic trap game for
Okay.
the Cowboys. I don't necessarily think a team can play their A game week after week after week. Now we saw the first 2 weeks; they couldn't have played better. 40-0 over the Giants,
Incredible.
30-10 over the Jets. I mean, played their A game both times. So I think they may have a little bit of a slip up here, not to where they lose. But I don't necessarily see them going here and winning this game by 30 plus points like everyone thinks. And oh, by the way, like Arizona, yes, everyone believes they're tanking. They're leading in the fourth quarter in week one in Washington,
Yeah.
and they have a huge lead before it all fell apart last week. So it's like this team doesn't seem like it's playing all that badly to
Now they
me.
played well. They definitely play
So
well.
I think they surprise people and play competitively again. And look, I'll say the Cowboys win. They win by 10. That covers the number. I think the Cardinals will be able to cover this spread, but I will not take them to win the game outright. The
I was gonna
Cowboys, we know,
say.
are one of the better teams. No, I am not going that far. I would have been fine with you walking off the show. I mean, I would have been
I would have
too
been like, we
too
want
crazy
to
on
talk
my
about
part.
hot takes going on right now. I mean, woo, what are we doing here in week
Yeah,
three? But yeah,
that
I see your points on that. I still think the Cowboys are
that
going to cover, but there's some huge numbers that are very difficult to swallow this week. I can understand people picking on the Cardinals side of that. Um, you know, we'll see what happens. I need more from that Cowboys offense. They got to step up more. I need some more consistency on that side of the ball. The final 425 game, as we mentioned earlier, Bears Chiefs. Don't think we have to talk about this much. I mean, you want to talk about another game with a huge spread, 12.5 points is the last time I saw. I think the Chiefs cover that. I think they win. I think it's going to be very ugly for the Bears. Very, very fast going here 0-3. And I expect this Chiefs offense to actually get right here in this game.
great. I mean, I think we even made this pick earlier when you asked if I thought they'd cover the number. I said I do believe they will. I think as Travis Kelce gets healthier, that just elevates the offense that much more. I see it being a big game for Mahomes against a defense that's been overmatched. The whole team has been overmatched. So I think the Chiefs cruise in this one.
The Sunday night game is a classic NFL rivalry. It's the Steelers versus the Raiders. These two teams, of course, are not what they were about 50 years ago, but two teams that are both 1-1 and two teams that have a lot of offensive questions. Jimmy G not looked great. He's not played well. The Raiders got shellacked, as we said, up in Buffalo last week. The Steelers, they're 1-1. They've played two putrid games on offense to start the season. Kenny Pickett has looked like who all the praise. I was buying the Steelers, man. They look bad, really bad. And I have to wonder sometimes, and credit to you, you made this point. I mean, am I wondering if Najee Harris sometimes is running in quicksand out there? I mean, I don't know what the hell is going on there. I mean, the guy looks slow. I mean, I saw people clowning on him on Twitter saying that they could run faster than him. I mean, there's a lot going on there in Pittsburgh. That being said, their defense still pretty damn fantastic. We've seen that through the first 2 weeks, especially last week. I'm taking the Steelers. I don't have a lot of respect for the Las Vegas Raiders. I think it's going to be a really boring, ugly 16-14 type of game, but I'm picking the Steelers to win this one.
I am too, and honestly, I'm surprised that as we look at this, that Vegas has the Raiders as a 2.5 point favorite. I don't think they're
Crazy.
good enough to get that much respect. Honestly, I know they're at home, and they've got some weaponry on offense, but I'm with you. I'm taking the Steelers. We saw kind of an emerging performance from George Pickens, very talented
Get
player.
him the
I
ball.
know the offense hasn't clicked, but they can get him the ball. Fryermuth at tight end, like they have some guys for Pickett to go to. We don't have a lot of confidence in the running game for obvious reasons, but more so it's about what the Steelers can do on the defensive side, led by T.J. Watt, who's become one of the
Amazing.
best on that side of the ball. I think the Steelers defense turns over Garoppolo and company a couple of times, and that's the difference.
What's going on with I don't know how many times this is going to happen this season, but a trend of last week continues this week. There is two Monday night games going on this week. The Eagles play the Bucs in the first game there at 7:15. Actually ends up being a pretty fascinating matchup. Two teams coming in 2-0. One team in the Bucs playing way higher, as we've talked about, than expectations. The Eagles 2-0, kind of playing down to expectations. Have not looked great, particularly with their passing game on the offensive side of the ball. That being said, I think this Eagles team, they're overwhelmingly more talented. They're going down to Tampa. I understand it might be hot and humid in September down in Florida, just like the Miami situation, but I expect them to win this game. I don't know how great it's going to look. I think there's still going to be some growing pains here for the Eagles. They did lose both coordinators, as we've talked about on previous shows, but I think the Bucs are going to come a little bit back to earth. I think the Eagles are going to win this one.
Yeah, I think you pretty much summed it up well. Like, the Bucs have obviously exceeded our expectations, so because of that, I don't take the Eagles to win 35-7 as I might have, when I looked at this game before the season. So, if the game is a one-score game, wouldn't necessarily be surprised, but I'm not going against the Eagles and all their weapons on offense. I think they get it done.
The final game, the second Monday night game, the 8:15 game, is the Rams visiting the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, this game, Super Bowl rematch. You would think there's a lot of hype going into this from the Super Bowl, obviously, a couple of years ago. At the moment, we don't know because it's a Monday game, but at the moment, we'd say the needle's leaning to Joe Burrow not playing. That's what this is looking like. That's what kind of Jamar Chase seemed to say. Burrow said, yeah, we'll check it over the next 36 hours, 48 hours or so earlier today. Wearing the sleeve, kind of looked like he had a slight limp with the calf there, walking to the practice field this week. Got on the cart to talk to owner Mike Brown, didn't even walk around with him. Even Jamar Chase said that was a little weird. He doesn't really expect him to play. I believe Jake Browning, if I'm remembering that correctly, would be the starter. With Burrow expecting him not to play, in my mind, even if he does play, he's not 100% clearly. They don't look like they're right. I'm going to surprise you here. I'm taking the Rams to win this game. Do I think the Rams are a playoff team? No. But in this spot, it's kind of the perfect storm because they've been the complete opposite of the Bengals, a team that we expected to massively click on offense, be one of the juggernauts in the league. The Rams, look at all their offensive statistical categories. They're 1, 2, 3 in the league. So they've played really, really well. Puka Nacua is expected to play. I know he's questionable with the oblique injury. They're expecting him to play. Of course, if he doesn't play, that's a major loss, but I expect him to play. I think the Rams, in a close game, they're going to come into a hostile environment in Cincinnati, going to hand the Bengals an 0-3 start to start the season.
Yeah, Puka Nacua, it's amazing. He's stepped in and he's basically been Cooper Kupp.
Setting the records. He's been better than anybody.
15 catches last week.
25 for the season.
Remarkable performance. I'm pretty sure, like, fantasy-wise, wide receivers, it goes Justin Jefferson 1, Puka Nacua 2.
Did you have that on your bingo card before the season?
No. Yeah. If you did, you're winning a lot of money. I think that's for sure. But when I look at my pick for this game, to me, really comes down to whether Joe Burrow plays or not. I mean, it's that simple. It's not. I agree with you. Like, I wouldn't even be that confident if I knew he was playing. I probably am taking Cincinnati just based on desperation, the fact that they're at home, the fact of how much I believe in the offensive skill players that they have there, and that eventually they're going to get it right. But if we're leaning towards he's not playing, I would have to take the Rams because they have been impressive through 2 games, like even against the 49ers, played them close, within one score there, right down to the end. And Cincinnati, something just looks amiss there. Like, offensively, it's just not clicking. Whether Burrow's not 100%, they're not protecting him well. He's not, they just don't have the same productivity in the passing game. So if we're going on the premise that Burrow doesn't play, I cannot ride with, as you mentioned, Jake Browning. They brought A.J. McCarron back aboard, so he's another possibility. But I would have to go Rams, so I'm going to have to lock in Rams as we stand right now with Burrow's status uncertain.
Yeah, it's tough to pick just because we don't know what's going to happen. But still, as we both said, he hasn't looked great in there. And now this is a big thing for Cincinnati. And I understand they're all professionals and they're not going to want to, hear this from obviously media greater than us. But They go 0-3, especially if Burrow plays. I think it's time to shut him down for about a month, maybe more, get him healthy, and I think you have to chalk this up to a lost season. Yeah, I mean, it happens. Sometimes good teams have lost seasons. It just happens. You get a higher draft pick, maybe you can get a big star defensive offensive player there. You don't want to have a potential Achilles pop like what happened to Rodgers, which was precursed from a calf injury. I think they have to be very careful to the highest paid player in football that they just made before the season. So big turning point to the season for the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll have to see what happens with them. But if that's it,
Yeah.
that's our thoughts there on our picks. You had any other final thoughts on that game?
Yeah, well, it's a good point about Burrow. It kind of feels different just as we close up here. Like last year, they started 0-2, and this year they're 0-2. It doesn't quite feel the same.
Yeah.
Right, like last year, the Burrow injury is what sounds the alarm bells 10 times more.
Yeah, for sure. It's just like there's something not right there. He's been very open about that, and I just don't think you should play around with this. I think you should shut it down. But yeah, guys, with that being said, as the light's starting to flicker here in the studio here, thank you for watching First and 10. If you've watched to this far, we greatly appreciate you. Comments, likes, and subscribing, all of that really helps the channel. Let us know your picks down below. Of course, it's been, an interesting start. I mean, I know if you're a fantasy player out there, I know you're hurting because there has been significant injuries across the league, particularly to the running back position. If you're like me and you're 0-2 to start the season, you're in desperation mode, just like some of these teams out here in the NFL. If you're on the East Coast, not only are the game's going to be wet and dirty that you're watching and kind of some messy offensive performances expected to come, but also be safe out there because there's heavy storms coming here as well, as you see the lights flicker here as well. So be careful, be safe out there. Enjoy your NFL Sunday. Bri, of course, always thank you for joining me, man. I greatly appreciate you. And is there any social media or anything you want to shout out to the people to follow you on?
Well, the Twitter I always say this, it's very complicated. It's at Brian Goudsworth.
Simple.
Easy. Right. You never know it. There's no extra bells and whistles, no numbers, hashtags, any crazy symbols. So just simple, the name, first and last, capital letters on the first and last name, and away you go. So we had a little bit of an ominous sign there with the lights flickering, but that's how we bid you adieu for this evening. Always fun.
Always fun, Bri. I love it. We're staying consistent, ladies and gentlemen, this season. We said we were. We're doing good, knock on wood, so far to start the season. This will be up Sunday morning. You'll see it before the games. Thank you so much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends if you be so kind. And until next week of First and 10, guys, thank you for watching.